to this. All right, gentlemen, welcome, welcome. Today I have a treat for you guys. I know I've been talking about this for a very long time. I've been making promises and telling you guys about the fantastic individuals we're going to bring in. Well, today I have one of them with us here. Um, Please welcome Dr. Howard Rankin. Dr. Howard, it is fantastic to have you with us.
Well, great to be here, JK. It really is awesome. Um, I'm just looking forward to it so much. I
Great.
really am.
Great. Good to have you here. Few things about Dr. Howard. Just let me do I'm going to read this out because I did try to put together a little bit of his qualifications, but he has such vast experience that I have to read it out. Um, Dr. Rankin is very knowledgeable and has a lot of expertise in the area of neuroscience, behavior change, neurotechnology. By the way, we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I have some questions for you, and
Mhm.
psychology. He's, of course, worked in the addiction area. He's also run both inpatient and outpatient programs, lots of experience there. In terms of academics, he's got that covered. Researcher, he's also been a practitioner, lots of speaking, and he's also a coach and a best-selling and award-winning author. I actually have one of his books, but he's actually written 12 books, co-written another two, and I feel like every time I speak with him, we're talking about the next book or project he's working on. He's also ghostwritten 30 others. For those of you who are wondering, those of you who spend a lot of time on Zoom, his background is not one of those, fake backgrounds with the books. Those are books. Those are real books. He's been a consultant with the World Health Organization as well. Been featured in a lot of media, and I am honored to have him as one of Porn Reboot's coaches. Dr. Howard, why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are? You know a little bit about our audience. We work with men who struggle with sexually compulsive behaviors, but tell us a little bit about you.
Well, you mentioned quite a lot of it right there. Originally from the UK, did all my training in the UK and landed my first job at the Institute of Psychiatry's Addiction Research Unit. And that was one of the leading addiction research places in the world at that point. This was at a time when psychologists were actually just getting into the addictions in the research field. Before that, a lot of it had been medical or sociological. But at that time, psychologists were getting into it, and I just landed in the right place at the right time. In fact, it was meant to be a 6 month position, but I ended up staying for more than 10 years.
Wow.
And just a lot of opportunity at that point. The Institute of Psychiatry had an inpatient and outpatient unit, so we were seeing a lot of people. We were devising experiments um, and research around different ways of treating addictions. And in fact, one great story is my colleague and I had invited various people that we knew had alcohol problems to come and talk to us about the ideas that we had.
Hmm.
And we had sent letters out. This was pre-email, time letters saying we're interested in pursuing, different forms of treatment, and we'd like your feedback. And so I remember, well, I think it was a Friday. One guy came to see us, dressed as a suit, in a suit, looked great, looked like he's just come from, his business, carrying a briefcase. And we welcomed him, and he said, "So you guys think you can treat this?" And we said, "Yeah." He reached into his case, pulled out, I think it was at least half a bottle of vodka, opened it, drank it back in one go, and said, "Treat that."
Wow.
And, understand where he was coming from. He was challenging us to, you guys really think you can treat this? But it was so memorable. Um,
What
and,
happened though? Was it?
after that, the guy left, and I'm not sure. I can't remember whether we saw him again or not. Um, but for me, therapy and coaching, and there is a big difference between them. And I really like the coaching aspect. We can talk a little bit about that. But for me, and it took me a while to learn this as, supposedly a leading behavior change specialist, a lot of it was about communication.
Mm,
A lot of it was about communicating effectively. And interestingly, there's still not a lot of education given to therapists or coaches in this field about effective communication.
okay.
And as I say, I was 15 years into my career and I thought, I'm trying to change people's behavior, but nobody's ever talked to me about how to communicate with
Mm,
people. And I found that really a very important part of it. This is very important. You've got to meet people where they're at. This notion that somehow you're the wizard, the magical, knowledgeable person, and you're just going to wave a magic wand and they're going to get fixed is nonsense. Okay. It's not about me, it's about you. Right. And we have to establish that bridge. It got to the point where people, come to me and say, and I know that they'd had, many attempts at quitting smoking.
okay.
They'd sit down, and my first question would be, why the hell do you want to quit? Because I want to know what their view is. What I think, oh yeah, you should quit because it's good for you, is irrelevant largely, right? And so that's very, very important, I think, that I learned just from experience in my career. You know, I am working with you. It's not I've got all this knowledge and I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to go away and it's going to be great. No, it's got to be individualized at so many levels, right? I mean, yes, there'll be some fundamental
Mhm.
principles and but it's got to work at an individual level. And if you don't create that, it's going to be a challenge,
Yeah.
you know.
Howard, I love the fact that you emphasize the communication part and meeting somebody where they're at. I think a lot of coaches and therapists can get very excited, especially in this information driven society, and just want to dump knowledge on people. One of the things I tell our clients is that um, you need to be reminded more than you needed to be thought. And reminded, I don't mean like I'm telling you what to do. It's you
Right.
just need to be reminded of some of the basics as we communicate. That, for instance, you are the best expert at yourself. And neither you nor I, Howard, can, how would I say, tell people what to do. We have to
Right.
have that communication with them. And at the very least,
Right.
at the end of the day, when somebody has develops the confidence through communicating with you that, you know what, I actually have the internal resources to do this. I just didn't know. And it's so great to just talk to you and you maybe ask a couple of questions
Mm.
and to be able to realize that myself. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of danger in telling people what to do. Um, I will admit, though, that early on in my practice, I was guilty of that. Super excited, telling people what to do. And then a year later, they would come back, and I was just like, oh crap, like they followed that a little bit too literally.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so that is wonderful to hear, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a couple of psychologist friends of mine write a book a few years ago called "Telling Ain't Training," and that's true. You can tell people all you want. That's not going to move them unless it connects somehow with them. And one of my favorite story, when I was on the addiction research unit, I mostly worked on the alcohol drug side. There was another group of people worked on the smoking
Mm,
side. And there was a guy in the smoking clinic who had tried to quit numerous times and just keep coming back and just not, he just wasn't doing it. But I knew something about him. I knew that he was a sort of avid socialist, which in the UK at this time was not unreasonable. The Labour Party had been in power at various points, and he knew that. And everyone was having a tough time getting him motivated. And one day I actually saw him in the local store actually buying cigarettes out of a machine. You could do that, back in those days. And he was pulling, putting his money in and pulling that. And I said to him, "Oh boy, Joe, those capitalist tobacco companies have really got you by the, you know what?" He quit. He quit. I made a connection with him, something that was so important to him, that was more important than smoking, right? And, it's a great example, a fun example, but a great example of meeting people where they're at,
I
you
love
know.
it. That's such a good story. I remember when we first met, you told me that one. When clients come to us, sometimes it's challenging, Howard, to uh, also find out where someone is at when they're dealing with a sexually compulsive behavior, because there's shame to overcome,
Yes.
and sometimes there's trauma as well. One of the things I ask them, just as a basics, when they're just like, they don't know how to say to communicate it. I tell them that this might be helpful. There are three reasons that I've seen why most men, generalizing, choose to end this behavior, just to help them out. Love, when it's out of love, like I really care for my partner, my kids, and I just don't want to hurt them anymore with my behavior.
Mm-hmm.
The next is duty, a sense of duty to their career. They're like, I'm a professional, I'm a physician, I might even be a therapist struggling with
Mm-hmm.
this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my duty to actually be in recovery at the very least and perform at a certain level. And the final one is fear of living with this forever, fear of destroying my life, fear of destroying my career as well. And then from there, they're able to kind of pick where they want to, which direction that they want to go in. So I resonate
Yes.
with you on that with communication, but I'm going to segue real quick into there are a couple of things I want to cover, and I know we don't have that much time. I want to be respectful of your time. um, in the porn reboot system, we've been very good at helping people change the way we work, to put it in a simple ways. We help them develop the right habits when it comes to the process of rebooting. By the way, we call it rebooting because we see traditional recovery, as simplistic as this sounds, it might be a bunch of semantics there, as simply recovering the things you lost to your compulsive behavior. Rebooting is more about hitting the reset button in different areas of your life where there needs to be change. Um, and we start with teaching you the habits you need, and then we teach you how to incorporate it into your lifestyle. But we also understand that your self image has to change. You're no longer a man who engages in that behavior. But we ran
Mm-hmm.
into a problem, Howard, which is why you're here. We realized that some men had things in the past, and things in the present that they were dealing with in terms of trauma. That's not an area of my expertise, which is why we brought you and a few other coaches on. Could you talk to us briefly about trauma and addiction recovery? And I know you have experience in different areas with
Mm-hmm.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. And trauma, of course, goes across the continuum of impact. There's some trauma that is, it's still traumatic, but people can remember it and, sort of process it, all the way to the extreme end of trauma where it's totally buried in the subconscious. It still impacts them in so many ways. It's just too difficult to deal with. And I have worked with clients at that end, and that's an amazing journey. It really is an amazing journey. In the most extreme example, I had a woman who literally was multiple personality disorder
Hmm.
from abuse from her childhood and her parents. Um, and so, this dissociation, this dissociation between trauma and the conscious memory of it is, and being able to address it appropriately is the big challenge. I personally believe it needs to be done. It has to be processed, otherwise it will linger in your mind, body, in your subconscious, and will impact you. It will impact you. So it does need to be addressed. That takes courage, actually, on both both the coach and the client's perspective. It's not easy, which is, if it were easy, people would do it. But I do think that's important, and there are ways of doing that. there's a lot of fear that goes into these things, um, obviously. And also part of it is, as you related to a little earlier, the shame and guilt and humiliation and all of that. And um, I have experience with shame, guilt, and humiliation. And I personally learned a lot from it and understand the reluctance, the reticence, the defense of looking at some of these things in your life that are painful.
Mm.
But there's an amazing reward when you do that. Amazing, amazing reward. And so it's got to get past this anxiety, this fear. Oh my God, what will people think of me? What will, it's okay,
All
you
right,
know?
Howard, I'm going to pause you there. It just reminded me of one of the things I wanted to cover with you. You do have a very interesting story um, that comes with this, and I think I believe that a lot of brothers, I don't, I credit our success at Porn Reboot to the fact that I had to learn how to overcome my trauma and my shame and guilt and anxiety and publicly talk about the mistakes I made and the things I did. And one of the things that really attracted me to you was the fact that you do have a story like this and you have been very open and vulnerable about it. Do you mind just letting some of our brothers know your experience with?
No, no, I'd be very happy to share it
Yeah.
for a number of reasons. So I was, a very well respected psychologist, certainly in my town. And, I'd been on a lot of media. So I wasn't sort of A-list, I wasn't Dr. Phil, but, I'd been on CNN, The View, stuff like that.
Hmm.
And 2005, I took on a female client who was like the most seductive client I'd ever had. I mean, she
Hmm.
was always talking about having sex, and I was just like, no, that's not why we're here,
Hmm.
And we were in therapy for about 3 years. And then she quit, which was fine with me because I think I was being too nice. I should have said, no, if you're going to do this, forget it. I didn't do that. So she left. She called me up a few weeks later and said, I'd really like to come back. And I said, well, you're not coming back in therapy. She said, no, I don't want to be therapy. I just want to tell you, just chat and tell you how it's going on. I said, okay. So we did this on and off for about 4 years. And then one time, leaving my office, 2012, she kissed me and it went downhill from there very briefly. I mean, a day or two. We ended up having a relationship, and then I came to my senses. I'd never done that before. Anyway, to cut a long story short, about a month later, I got a call from the licensing department saying there was a complaint against me for sexual misconduct.
Hmm.
And 6 months later, they revoked my state license to practice clinical psychology. And a very biased piece appeared in the local and state newspaper about it on the front page. And so here I was, I'd gone from Paragon, done all these things in the community, to pariah. Yeah, shame, humiliation, and disgrace.
Hmm. Howard,
And
that's that's rough hearing it. This is the second time I'm hearing it, but well, actually, this is the third time I'm hearing it. It's rough to hear it, and it would be interesting because you you not only overcame that, but you've thrived in terms of your practice and your reputation. And I think that a lot of our clients have visible positions and they
yeah,
just have this fear of like,
of
oh
course,
my God, what would happen if I was
right,
exposed? How did you
right.
deal with this, man?
Obviously, it was very damaging initially. You go through initial phase, pretty depressed. Honestly, what am I going to do? I mean, not just that. I've lost my career. I've lost, yeah, who's going to hire me? It was interesting. I had a couple of pretty high profile organizations reach out rather excitedly about the possibility of me joining them. And then clearly they saw something in the newspaper and I never heard from them again. So I wasn't going to get employed. Um, and It was rough. And then one day, and I was probably like 4 months in at this point, maybe something like that. One day I said, this has got to stop. I can spend the rest of my life trapped in revenge fantasies, anger, depression, beating myself up. I can do all that. But that's going to be the worst thing I could possibly do. The only thing I can do is make meaning out of this. If in 5 years' time this was the best thing that ever happened to me, what do I have to do? What do I have to do? And I took that mindset, and from that point on, it was very positive, very positive. Um, I had no problem telling people. In fact, I was perhaps a bit too open about it. People were thinking of, oh, well, I'd like to help you, ghostwrite my book. And, ghostwriting, my name wouldn't appear on it, what have you. But I still felt the need to say, okay, I need to tell you something. And I tell them the story. And what was really interesting about that, JK, what was fascinating, I tell my story, and there were one or two people who probably said, well, okay, yeah, I don't think I kind of want to work with you. That's fine. But the vast percentage of people said, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate your honesty.
Mm,
And instead of getting a lot of flack and kickback and abuse, I got actually the opposite. People appreciate it. They don't expect people to share that stuff. They just don't. And when you do, and they're on it and they appreciate it, that does something for you because obviously, being your concern is you're not going to make connection with people. People don't want to know you. And when they respond positive to you, it's amazing, amazing. And so one of the big things that I learned from there is being honest. And then what happens is you lose the fear of, oh my God, what happens if somebody knows? Because what you find out when you're open is a lot of people who know don't really care, right? Everyone you thought knew, half of them don't even know about it anyway. Um, and you're just generally appreciated. And when you can talk about this openly without worrying about being embarrassed or shamed and what the other person's going to think, that to me is an example of resolving a trauma. You know, you can be yourself, you can be open, whatever, however people react, they react. That to me is huge. And that was a massive, massive lesson that I think is going to be very relevant for a lot of the brothers in this group.
oof, thank you for sharing that Howard.
Yeah.
I have to ask, just so that the brothers don't get the wrong impression, um, and there's sometimes this cognitive dissonance when somebody with a compulsive behavior is listening to somebody else, in the way that they could rationalize or justify certain things, sometimes justify holding back or justifying their fears. Are there any remnants of this emotionally in your personality or your behavior? I'm sure they've informed your values and principles,
Mhm.
but the trauma itself, is there still any remnant? And just as a quick example, some brothers may know this, some of the newer ones may not. But when I was 21 years old, my first year of college, I went to jail on a false rape charge, and it was absolutely traumatizing. I didn't know the laws. I immediately talked to the detective and told him I didn't do anything, and they completely changed the script, and they told me you're going to face 8 to 11 years, young man. I worked on that for quite a while. It impacted my dating life. I became very cautious around certain women. And I learned over the years to trim the fat, so to speak, from the things that were holding me back in intimacy. But even
Mhm.
now, even though I've been in a relationship for 14 years, um, I still have certain boundaries that I've set up as a result of that. And I sometimes feel that some of it is still like a little bit of a remnant, like there's a little shard
Mhm.
still in there. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Do you experience any of that right now?
Um, I understand what you're talking about. I would say, honestly, I mean, obviously the memory is still there and all of this, but emotionally, I don't think so.
Mm.
Emotionally, I don't think so. And again, I think that just came from being honest with people, getting surprisingly positive feedback, um, and just saying, wow, um, yeah, I mean, I'm going to own up to doing something silly, and I shouldn't have done that. Should the board take my license? I have no idea because they actually won't allow me to see who testified and what they testified and everything. It's
Ah,
really crazy how these boards operate.
ah,
That's sort of become a sort of subtext for me and something I'm trying to change because with these medical boards, basically you're proven guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. And the thing that they do, and the lawyers do say, well, you never put a client on the stand. You don't do that. It'll be okay. Well, if you don't do that, you have a chance to examine them. They could say anything they want. God
true.
knows what this woman said happens.
Yeah.
I've only seen one piece of evidence, and it was completely the opposite of what she told me.
Wow.
So I'm pretty sure that she gave them a lot of BS or a very different spin on it. And I didn't have the opportunity to challenge it. So, I mean, that bothers me, not for me, but for all the people in healthcare, the nurses, the doctors who really give their time and effort and life to help people. They should have a better, much more transparent system than
True.
exists.
Yeah. Unfortunately, bureaucracy is not that easy to change.
No.
They're
Yeah.
very much set in their ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, I absolutely understand and I can relate
Yeah,
to
you
why you
would.
are a coach now. But we won't get too deep into that. I think this would be a perfect time, Howard, to take a question or two that has been submitted from some of our brothers, if you don't mind.
Of
Let me
course.
pull one up real quick. Now, this isn't this question is more in a general form. I
Hmm.
won't say the brother's name just for privacy
Of
reasons, but
course.
he says that his current struggle is negative self-talk, self-thoughts rather, low
Hmm.
self-esteem, and worrying about what other people think of me and whether I've done something wrong that made them upset because I want to be the type of person who can relate to anyone and be liked. And just to give this a little bit more context, I like this question, Howard, because we get it a lot from the brothers in our group, especially those who are a little bit younger, where they engage in this out of control behavior. They go out into the world, and it's almost as if their shame is causing them to be they're almost, how would I say it? What's the word for it? Transmitting something. They're almost
Hmm.
like an antenna
Hmm.
for other people's thoughts, and they
Hmm.
really want to be liked. What do you have to say to this, brother? I know it's a general question, and you'd prefer to
Yes, it
ask
is,
more.
but it's a very important one
Hmm,
because in this sort of situation, it's very easy, and again, I can identify with that. It's very easy to get into a very self-negative mindset and start questioning yourself and challenging yourself about everything and about yourself. That's part of the problem. This becomes a habit. Now, even if we're not talking about issues really related to your questionable behavior, it becomes a habit. You start, oh, should I do that? Can I do that? What have you? And your self almost dissolves. And we have to get that back. We have to get that back, clearly. And there are various ways of doing that. Part of it is a change in mindset, which isn't going to happen like overnight, but to recognize, look, there's no such thing as a perfect human being, right? There is no perfect human being. We've all got flaws. We've all got flaws. We've all done stupid things. There's nobody on the earth who hasn't done that. Okay. So what we need isn't so much self-esteem, but we need to start with some self-compassion. Okay. Be your best friend to yourself. When you start saying, "Oh, Howard, you're such an idiot. You shouldn't have done that," your best friend comes and says, "Howard, stop beating yourself up.
Mm,
Okay. Yeah, we accept you made a mistake. That's okay. And admitting it's fine. But don't overdo it. Okay. Don't let this literally kill you. Okay.
mm,
We're going to learn from it and we're going to move on. So self-compassion, I think, is really important part of that. And then, of course, there's a variety of strategies where you can get people challenging those negative thoughts, and and when you can do that, amazing things happen. When you emerge from beating yourself up, and stop doing that is not the same as giving yourself a free pass. Okay. Yeah, I still admit I did something dumb. Okay. But that's in the past. I've got to move forward. And I cannot be stuck here in this negative self image. Otherwise, anything I try to do, including making it better, I'm going to doubt and I'm going to question.
mm.
Right?
You talked about what it would take to actually not be hard on himself. Could you talk a little bit about the need to be liked by others?
Yeah. I mean, we're social animals. We need connection. We need connection to people. And when you don't have that, when you feel isolated, when you don't feel worth, that's a very negative, depressing state to be in. And the problem is it tends to be a sort of self-professing argument because, oh, nobody's going to like me, so I won't bother to go out. Now I'm at home feeling mad and sad, and now what am I going to do? Oops, danger sign, right? So these things can develop into behaviors that seriously are not helpful. Right? And so, part of it is learning some skills. Not everyone knows, or we talked about at the beginning about communication. How do you communicate really effectively with people? How do you get them to engage? Right? And so there are some simple tools there that again I think are important. So people feel that hey, I can go out, and it's not so much oh nobody wants to talk to me. It's okay, I've got some tools now where I can engage with people, and the more they do that, the better they feel about themselves.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Hmm.
Um, one more question, and let's see right here. I'm actually going to switch it up on you. We had another question that has to do with trauma. And this brother says that for the entire month of March 2022, he says, I was severely depressed and suicidal. I also gained a lot of weight due to not moving and overeating, which made me realize that I very likely have bipolar type 2. He spoke to a therapist who confirmed this. He says, I was treated in a mental ward for a short period and basically regained clarity of thought the first day after getting sleeping pills and pills to relax. After this incident, I sometimes have a sense that I am running away from a major pain, as if I'm avoiding the process of grieving and sadness for everything that I've lost and missed out on because of decades of compulsive sexual behavior. If this is indeed the case, how can I shed light on this grief that I'm running away from and stop avoiding it?
Well, that goes back to what we were talking about when we were originally talking about
Mm,
trauma. This has to need to be faced. And obviously, there are a whole variety of strategies and techniques to get people to be able to face the issue.
mm,
Unfortunately, a lot of times, trauma in a case like this is treated just like a lot of healthcare symptomatically. Well, we just give you some pills so you don't feel too depressed. That's not, there may be some real value in that. I'm not saying there isn't. And that may be necessary, but it's not sufficient. It's not dealing with the trauma. It's not honestly coming face to face with it, looking, and probably you have some misconceptions about your role in it or how it affected other people. And so when we can get that out and talk about it and process it, excuse me, and process it, then and then deal with it, then it doesn't need to be locked away,
Mm,
because even when it's locked away, and it is locked away in your subconscious and your mind body, there is still a sense there's something there. You know, just because it's locked away doesn't mean you lose awareness of the fact that it's still there. You might not have total awareness of all the things that are involved in that and the emotions and memory, but there's something there, right?
yeah.
And that impacts you. That impacts you. And so we have to unpack that. And that takes various lengths of time with different circumstances and different people. But ultimately, that has to be unpacked and unpacked in a way that is very effective and also empowering. I mean, I know that sounds contradictory.
Mm,
Oh, looking at all the things you screwed up on and mistakes, how can that be empowering? It is, because most of the time we just try to avoid it. That is the default setting of the brain and the mind. I don't want to deal with it. I avoid it. So I can pretend it doesn't exist or play the victim or do all sorts of things or just say that I'm useless. None of those things are appropriate. None of them. It's, I'm going to deal with it. Because once I deal with it, first of all, I'm not hiding from it. Secondly, I'll have a much more realistic view. Third, it won't continually impact me.
I think that's great. I think, and also to add to that, I think the realistic view, the fact that it's not going to impact you, you're dealing with it now. Um, and I'm sure you have strategies as well to help clients kind of reframe it
Yep.
as something that can actually kind of help them in the future. Because this brother is talking about running away from the grief, and there's so much fear of facing it. But his life is, the years go by, and he's very
Right.
aware of that.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And there's many things, it can impact many things you're not even really aware of too, that you might attribute to other things. Like, well, I'm not very sociable. Well, maybe you are, but your anxiety about going out is a problem. Mhm.
That's a good one, Howard. I remember identifying as an introvert. I was like, nah, I'm a loner. I'm an introvert. I just don't, just not a people person.
Right.
The truth is, I was hiding. I was running away
Yep.
from something.
That's right. Yeah, and we all do that. As I say, I mean, I think I was very fortunate in some respects when this experience happened to me. It was much later in life. I'd had a career in this field. I'd actually worked in this field. So I had some insights into it that probably most people don't have naturally. And so that helped me. I mean, I still went through the same process, but I cut it short. I cut it short. And best thing I ever did, really.
Fantastic.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. So,
Um, yeah, Howard, thank you for answering those two questions. Gentlemen, one thing I do want to emphasize is this is kind of just like an introduction to Dr. Rankin, and the purpose of having him on board is to have somebody with a wide range of experience with different modalities that you can feel comfortable speaking to and opening up to. And I just want to interject at this point that below this video, I'm going to drop a link to his private calendar for an initial discovery call with him. I mean, he is with us in the program, but just because he's here doesn't mean that he will work with you. It will be an evaluation. I can promise you he's a wonderful person to speak to. The discovery session is just to find out if both of you would be a good fit to work together. And I highly encourage those of you in the program to have this experience. He's vetted, so to speak, by me, but just for the purposes of this program. Back to this, I had one more question for you before we round this up. And it's on the topic of neurotechnology, which I'm personally fascinated by.
Mm.
I'm very, very interested in any sort of um, behavioral change, technology, and all the innovations. Could you speak
Mm.
briefly about that? Because I keep hearing it in different places, and I'm like, what?
Yeah,
They have all
sure.
these little devices, and
Yeah,
can you talk a
yeah,
little
and
bit
it's
about
def
that? Yeah.
I think it's definitely relevant. Like 2 or 3 years before, this incident with losing my license, I
Mm,
had really got into incorporating neuroscience into my practice and learning the technology. And there's some amazing technology out there, relatively simple, that you can do that
mm,
actually looks at different parts of the brain. And then there's things called neurofeedback, where you can use feedback to change the patterns in your brain, which are really cool. There are devices called audio visual entrainment, which you can use 10, 15 minutes at a time. And what that does is we've learned that if you stimulate the brain at a certain frequency through light and sound, the brain will match that frequency. So there's a way of either stimulating the brain or conversely, getting it to relax. Um, and I've used both of those tools. Very, very helpful. Very helpful. Because we can't ignore the brain.
true.
Um, you know, Probably there are a lot of people in the psychology field, and I know some of them who are very resistant to, well, that's different. That's neuroscience. That's got nothing to do. It's got everything to do with it. My view was, hey, if you took your car in to be fixed because there was a problem, and the guy spent the whole time talking about your driving, you know, psychotherapy, what would you say? You'd say, look under the hood, for God's sake. Yeah, you got to look at what's going on underneath. And these technologies allow that to happen and also allow at a pretty manageable level these tools to help you in the short term and then even in the long term. If, for example, you have a real problem relaxing or going to sleep or, any number of things, I really do believe they're important. As far as the audio-visual entrainment, I do know one of the pioneers in the field, a great guy, and he has a site called mindalive.com. And if you go to his site, his name's Dave Seaver. If you go to his site, you can see all the different machines and things, and also a lot of the research that has been done on these tools. And there is now pretty significant research. This goes back, 40 years now.
Mm.
So there's been quite a lot of research on the value of this. So I'm always mindful of that, particularly where people are coming with what we might call co-occurring conditions like depression or ADD or difficulty concentrating or something like that. Um, there are some useful measuring devices and certainly some therapies that I believe are actually quite powerful.
I am very, very fascinated with this. I'm going to check out the website.
Mm,
I might pick up one of these devices. I've just not been. I'm just like, oh my God, is this one of those pseudo? But
yeah,
there's more and more evidence coming out, and I can't deny it. So it's wonderful to hear that there might be relief. A lot of the brothers who struggle with compulsive disorders are often medicating, or you could say anesthetizing some other issue. It could be
yeah,
ADHD, it could be some past trauma, it could be some other issue. And to know that there's help for them with some of these devices is fantastic. Because sometimes they're like, oh my God, it seems like my therapist said I need to sit down and meditate more. And I can't even sit down for a
that's
minute.
right. Yeah, what do you mean? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I did one of the first projects in the U.S. Public school system using this.
Mm,
And what we were doing, we were doing brain mapping. We were looking at brain mapping in elementary school kids who were very troubled. And this was in a pretty low SES district, low socioeconomic district. So, single parents or being brought up by grandparents or what have you.
Hmm.
And the amazing thing was the brain mapping at that point could, and still definitely today, can tell whether you have a pattern that is consistent with what we might call ADHD. Okay.
Oh.
It can show that.
Huh.
And and that is so powerful. I remember, we would do these tests and the parents would come in, or one parent would come in. And this guy came in and, his ex-wife, who he had just had a very nasty divorce with, had claimed that their son had ADHD. And of course, he wasn't going to listen to
Hmm.
anything she said. And he said, no, he doesn't. When he's with me, he's fine. And he'd do the, and I said, okay, look, here's his brain map. You show a picture of the brain and you can say, this brain map is completely characteristic of someone who's got ADHD. And he started crying.
Hmm.
And then he said, okay, I'm going to make an appointment.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And when you see the brain and that can be explained to you rather than just, oh, well, I
Yeah.
think he's got ADHD. Well,
And
so
are there
what?
comparisons you can compare it with other models of like this is the brain of somebody
Exactly.
who's yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Exactly. And so one of the things we found there, I was going in expecting to find overdiagnosed, overprescribed ADHD. What I found, because of the nature of the district, completely the opposite. There were many kids who weren't even being assessed, let alone treated, who had very characteristic brain patterns. And so one of the outcomes of that project was the school district actually employed a sort of liaison officer to help get those kids to assessment. Um, and yeah, so that brain technology cannot be dismissed. Um, and again, some of that neurotechnology, and it's certainly come a long way in the 10 years since I was doing it. But that's certainly an option.
Fantastic. I'd be very interested as we progress to see how we could incorporate some of that into the program. We definitely have a lot of clients who had many issues overlooked. They end up coming into the program, and I'm often referring them out because I'm like, I know you have this problem with pornography, and I can
Right.
help you control
With
it, but
that,
it's going to be recurring until we address the thing that
the
was missed. And then
you,
they find
right?
out all sorts of things, Howard, from ADHD to other forms of learning disabilities, sometimes to biochemical issues like low testosterone and guys who are
Yep.
23, 24 years old because of their diet and so on. So,
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and that's also part of it. I mean, we have to look at the whole person. We have to look at the whole person, not just zero in on a symptom and this is how we're going to attack. We have to look at the whole person because that's what it's about. And so that does involve lifestyle issues, nutrition, exercise, stress management, sleep, the right levels of stimulation. Those are all important. And if we're working towards helping somebody manifest their full potential, those things are also part of it. You know,
absolutely.
very important.
Howard, I
Yeah.
couldn't have said it better. Gentlemen, you've heard it from Dr. Rankin himself. There are a lot of one of the reasons I've been against, and Howard, you're hearing this for the first time. I started off with a course many, many years ago, about in 2012, about 10 years ago, and I scrapped it because I realized that there couldn't be a cookie cutter methodology for dealing with a man who's dealing with a sexually compulsive behavior. And I couldn't, in good faith, put out a course and say, this is the solution to your problem.
Mhm.
Because, again, we had to address every aspect. And what we're doing here at Elevated Recovery and the Porn Reboot System, gentlemen, for those of you who may be watching this, maybe on YouTube or somewhere, and you're just like, well, what the heck's going on? Who are these guys? Is we want to address as many rather, I'll say every, but that's ambitious, but as many aspects of you as we can. From the trauma you're dealing with, we have the biochemistry reboot where you can get your blood work done, send it in to Coach Seamus, who's going to take a look at it. Now we have Dr. Rankin, who can work with you in many other aspects, look at the trauma you may be dealing with as a coach. Of course, this is coaching. And I think that's very important. So if you're watching this and you suspect that perhaps there is something else that you're just like, yeah, JK, I've heard you talk about unresolved issues and stress and environments and strong emotions, but I feel that there might be something else, then I highly recommend, if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening to this on the podcast, schedule a call with one of our Reboot strategists to see if you're a good fit. And for those of you who are in the implementation and in the intensive, you can go ahead and book a discovery call directly with Dr. Howard in the link below. Any final words?
No, I think that's a great lead into what my final words would be. We can't just look, unfortunately, the sick care system, not the healthcare system we live
Take
in,
care.
is based on symptomatic relief. Just focus on this. I'll tell you what to do. I'll give you a pill. But it's got to include the whole person. It's got to, at many different levels, at a psychological, at a social, at a biological. It's got to include the whole person. And we can't go for short, quick fixes, especially in these sorts of problems.
Yeah.
That's fooling yourself. And yeah, and I think that's the way to go. And that's how I practice.
Fantastic. Thank you so much
My
for sharing,
pleasure.
Dr. Rankin. It's a pleasure to have you. Um, Quick announcement. This may change, but for right now, at least for the next 90 days, Dr. Rankin will be available for group Q&As in the implementation program. Correct me if I'm wrong. Fridays at noon Central Standard Time. Yeah.
Correct.
And of course, if there are any adjustments to that, Reboot Hero, our concierge, will put up announcements in the group. It's a pleasure to have you, Dr. Rankin. Thank you very
Well,
much.
it's great to be here. Looking forward very much to working with you.